So a little over 3 months ago, I made this little thing called the Uptie 4 tier list efficiently as possible. It was the first video I ever uploaded, and well, I think that list is good-ish. Limbus is ever-changing, with new IDs and new perspective on older IDs. So every few months I plan to make a video like this one, and update you all on the state of Uptie 4's value. I would recommend watching that first video, but it's pretty long and honestly completely different from the content I do now, so I don't blame you if you do not go and watch it. But just know, in this video I will not be justifying my placements for all of these IDs in depth, as it would just be that video again, but I will be talking mostly about the changes I have made to the list, as well as the new additions. First of all though, let me reiterate the criteria for this list. Value is defined as the jump in quality from Uptie 3 to Uptie 4. This also accounts for how expensive the Uptie is. With base and 2-star IDs costing significantly less than 3 stars, they can get value easier. Though most 3-star IDs have better Upties anyways, just know that cost has been taken into consideration. The most significant reason for IDs moving up or down on this list is due to Railway's existence. But also, some further changes do come from getting a lot of feedback on the first tier list, and also just learning more and more about the game as time has gone on. Alright, short intro out of the way. Now, for reference, here is my old tier list from August, and here is my tier list now. You'll be seeing them a lot throughout the video, so you don't have to memorize anything, but there it is at a glance. I'll start with the new IDs and talk about those, since those are the most exciting ones. Then I'll go through the notable shifts in placement, and then I'll talk a little bit more about my thoughts on Uptie 4 as a whole, now that we're a few months out from it. Now, without further ado, Zig Gregor was the first ID released after my initial video, and conveniently is the worst of the new IDs to Uptie 4. Looking at this Uptie, he gains a good amount more on his skill 1 in particular, making him gain more shield on clash lose, and gain extra defense level up when he loses that clash. The rest of his benefits are sadly only really tangible at very high defense level up amounts, at least relatively for one skill slot. It requires either Faust to support him, or multiple skill slots. The main benefit is potentially gaining up to 3 extra coin power on his skill 3, Guardian, as well as making it deal a massive plus 50% more damage if at 10 plus defense level up. If nothing else, this Uptie is incredible for solo runs, and makes him more fun if you wish to build around him, but for the average player, Zig Gregor will do just fine at Uptie 3. Regret Faust is an incredibly weird Uptie to rank. Her skill 1 gains a consistent 6 tremor count generation with the clash lose effect added on, which can be a nice benefit, though of course you just want to win those clashes. Alternatively, the Uptie 4 allows you to just fire off a counter instead to gain the 6 tremor count, so if you know you're going to lose the clash on the skill 1 and you plan to use it anyways and it's on the bottom, you may as well use the counter. The main benefit is really the increase of power to the skill 3. The issue is, this power increase is conditional and not that much. Debuffs on the enemy is not a difficult condition, and 30% extra damage on the skill is definitely good, and the stagger threshold damage increases are also not insignificant, as well as the plus coin drop on the skill 2 being consistent is a nice, albeit small, benefit. Ultimately though, Regret Faust is perfectly usable at Uptie 3, and these buffs do not quite make or break the ID. Or at least that is what stupid idiot past Escu said. I am editing Escu, who is infinitely more knowledgeable, and past Escu totally ignored the fact that Uptie 4 buffs Regret Faust's passive, making it a little bit better for clashing, and more importantly, much better for tremor teams, allowing you to stack up those defense level downs a lot more than at Uptie 3. She was originally sat at a high C tier of value, but this passive change does bump her up to the bottom of B tier, where she now sits. I know you actually saw no problems, but I figured I had to point this out. This Uptie is still not among the best, but if you wish to run Tremor, it does make a lot of sense to Uptie her. Zig Faust is up next, and this Uptie is just a solid all-around buff, allowing Faust to gain aggro now, buffing her skill 2 base power, and giving it potentially more clash power at 5 plus defense level up. Her skill 3 also heals 2 more HP, which is just, great? Though the base power and extra defense level and haste to Zvi IDs is cool, and I look forward to when we have more of them so we can have a squad of defense level up monsters. Speaking of defense level up, her passive is also enhanced to give more of it when the adjacent allies are below 50% health. These factors combine to leave Zweifaust at a comfortable B tier of value, and it will only go higher as the game continues. She is still a little reliant on extra skill slots for her own conditions, but the base power buffs are pretty good, and supporting Zig Gregor, one of the stronger IDs in the game, is pretty solid. Muller Office Fixer Yisang is in a weird spot in terms of value, since his skill 1 gains a good majority of the buff, despite being a skill you are unlikely to use. But of course, what we care about is the coin power buff to that skill 3, making it roll a 19 instead of a 16 when the tremor count condition is met. Since this nuke is pretty essential to his rotation, making it as powerful as possible is, good. I would recommend this Uptie simply because it makes playing Muller Yisang much more fun, since the payoff is that much more. Realistically though, this Uptie sits on the high end of B tier. Another discard ID, Dei Rodian, who doesn't really gain much and is tricky to quantify the exact value of. The difficulty stems from her gaining both a little bit more shield and more aggro. Now, if she straight up just got aggro, it would be much easier to value, but it is just an increase to her already existing aggro. In the end though, I do think these smaller increases do matter, but most importantly, her skill 2 and skill 3 have increases. Extra clash power on her skill 2 with 5+ sinking, and especially extra coin power on her skill 3 with 7+ sinking are both very good benefits, with the skill 3 coin power allowing her to roll a 20 total. Now, 7 sinking sounds like a lot. Surely, there's no extremely convenient ego that makes the condition basically entirely moot, right? Surely, Project Moon would not release something insane like that. Just use Rhymeshank. Specifically at Threadspin 4. It is insanely good. Regardless, Diechi's Uptie 4 is pretty solid, mostly because she has excellent synergy with one of the best ego in the game. And thank God I can finally talk about the funniest ID in the game. I wanted to make a whole video on the entirety of the 7 Association when this banner came around, so I'll use this time to talk about why I love this ID so much, while also talking about his Uptie 4. So, his skill 1. This skill is really boring at Uptie 3. It's kind of your standard rupture on each coin skill, but at Uptie 4, on a heads hit, it's 2 rupture per coin with 2 instances of application. So, 4 rupture total, right? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is on his passive, which is also buffed by Uptie 4. Before, it only gave +1 rupture when dealing fatal damage to the enemy, but you can now get +2 rupture application when on a 7 Association team, meaning this skill can inflict 12 rupture. Yeah, this has got to be one of my favorite skill 1s in Limbus now. 12 rupture is the same as Branch of Knowledge hitting heads. That's an ego. This means 7 Association Heathcliff has the power equivalency to a giant tree branch in his little ass sword. Don't worry about the power scaling implications of that, I assure you, it's fine. Outside of the funny skill 1, a base power on his skill 2 brings him in line with the other single coin skill 2s of the game, and the extra coin power condition on the skill 3 means on a rupture team, you are rolling a 16 total, and this skill is truly fantastic for rupture teams and another contender for my favorite skills. Suncliff's Uptie 4 is practically a no-brainer for rupture teams, and even outside of them, it is a pretty good Uptie. Fittingly, 7 Association Faust is next. As you can see, the bulk of the buff here is in the coin power, both on the skill 1 and especially 2. Though honestly, the more important buff for rupture teams is her gaining some clash win rupture count on that skill 3. Rupture teams love their count application, so even though this does not make her skill 3 completely count neutral, it does make it less count negative. A more niche benefit of this buff is the guard. As most of you probably know, Uptie 4 gives every defensive skill a Sin Affinity. This ended up giving a few IDs 4 Sin Affinities total, and 7 Faust is one of those IDs. You can technically fuel Fluid Sac with less problems because of this guard. Even though it does not roll particularly well, and Faust is not particularly tanky, it is something worth noting since current rupture teams are lacking in the Lust department. As well, her skill 3 can gain a lot of extra damage if you have up to 15 rupture on the opponent, so there's a lot to like about this buff. Obviously, it centers around Rupture, but 7 Faust is an undeniable core member of modern Rupture teams, so if you like Rupture, again, this one, even more so than 7 Heathcliff, just makes sense. Oh boy, a charge ID. Surely this ID will not gain really good value from Uptie 4. Surely he will break the trend of charge IDs needing their Uptie 4. My coping aside, yeah, this is just solid enough to break the A tier. More charge gain, more charge barrier, in fact guaranteed charge barrier on himself on his skill 2, since now he only needs 5 charge to get a charge barrier, making him even more effective at being tanky, and of course, the skill 3 coin power, letting Honglu have a 17 rolling 3 coin skill 3. A 17 rolling skill 3 with 3 coins with no condition, no less, and an actually good effect in the form of charge barrier spreading. Yeah, this skill 3 is very solid. Though I actually want to talk about his guard. I know I just talked about a guard with 7 Faust, but this is one of the best guards in the game, and it's not because of the Sin Affinity. Why? Well, he's a Honglu ID, and every Honglu ID must have at least one insanely broken thing in their kit. But seriously, this rolls an 18 and gives himself 3 charge barrier, which means it gives him 33 shield total. For reference, most of the good guard skills give out 20 shield, which makes this guard almost objectively 1.5 times better than those guards. In addition, Warp Honglu gets 1 more haste from his passive, cementing him as the consistently fastest 2-star ID. A very good Uptie, which makes him a very good 2-star ID. Now another tricky ID to rank, Muller Otis. She gains a little bit more final power on her skill 1, some more tremor application on her skill 2, and of course the big one, +1 coin power for her skill 3 when her condition is met. What makes this hard to rank is the probability of how much you will actually activate this skill 3 condition. If you do get it, this Uptie is very good, since a 24 rolling 4 coin skill 3 is just a hilarious amount of damage, especially with the extra tremor bursts dealing a bit more damage with her passive, or with Regret Faust on the team. The skill 1 final power is also not ignorable. A 13 as opposed to a 12 skill 1 is nice, but Moulder Otis is one of the IDs that uses skill 1s the least by far, since her other skills are just objectively better. I still believe the extra tremor and coin power elevates Muller Otis this high. Just do be wary that you need to be sure you'll be hitting that daring decision coin power to truly feel the effects of this Uptie, or run her in a full tremor team so you can feel the effects of the extra potency. Corp Eang. Hopefully the most recent ID at the time of this video's release, but I'll probably cut that pretty close. And he definitely gets a lot from Uptie 4. At Uptie 3, his Rupture support is pretty limited, but Uptie 4 fixes that problem entirely, and even helps him out in some other ways. Importantly, his skill 2 now gives 7 charge count on use. This means that after using one skill 1, which gives him 4 charge count, or basically 3 charge next turn, and then upon using the skill 2, you immediately gain the coin power condition on turn 2. Whereas before you needed some other form of charge generation, or his extra coin power on the skill 2 would need to be activated on turn 3 instead. More importantly, the skill 2 inflicts 2 Rupture count on the last coin, which is obviously very good for Rupture synergy, and further Rupture synergy is unlocked on the skill 3, giving 3 Rupture count onto the enemy before the attack begins when he uses the skill 3 at 15 plus charge. And of course, because he's a charge ID, his skill 1 gets some extra coin power at 10 plus charge as well. The biggest thing for non-Rupture teams really is that skill 1 into skill 2 with additional coin power combo, since that is very practical. Even on non-full Rupture teams, the skill 3 giving Rupture count before the attack is pretty good and relevant, since that can be set up pretty easily to take advantage of some random Rupture potency. He goes between Corp Honglu and Hook Honglu. Even though he does not have an icon on the actual tier list, we'll just throw him on there. Speaking of Hook Honglu, he is an abominably strong ID, with immense amounts of damage for a 2-star, most of which is locked behind conditions that can only be accessed with Uptie 4. Specifically, his extra final power on the skill 1 and the coin power condition for his skill 2. The skill 2 condition is what we care about most here, since a 16 rolling skill 2 with 3 coins is literally what most 3-star IDs have. So it's hilarious to have easy enough access to that with a 2-star. While that alone is insane and would warrant him a spot in the A tier, it would be silly to ignore a number that is somewhat easy to miss. The extra damage condition on the skill 3, which scales with an enemy's missing HP, gets increased from a max of plus 30% more damage to a max of plus 50% more damage. Since this condition applies on broken parts of abnormalities, it is pretty damn relevant, and a plus 20% boost in damage on a skill like this should not be brushed off. The other changes are small consistency adjustments, except that final power on the skill 1, which is just a nice way to cement Honglu very firmly near the top of A tier. And who else could be almost at the top but Warp Ryoshu? I could literally just point to DDEDR gaining plus 2 coin power compared to Uptie 3, and the placement would be entirely justified and I wouldn't have to say more, but there is more to say. Similar to W Yi Sang, Ryoshu at Uptie 3 needs 2 turns to get her skill 2 plus 1 coin power condition. At Uptie 4, this is resolved of course, in much the same way, meaning a skill 1 into a skill 2 is a free 20 rolling skill 2. That also inflicts 2 slash fragility, and gives a bunch of haste if it happens to kill. What's more, her skill 3 also gives 2 more charge barrier on kill, meaning she will refund even more of the charge she used to fire off the skill. What is even more is that at Uptie 4, her evade can be made into one of the best in the game with 15 plus charge with a raw roll of 17. Also at 15 plus charge, her skill 1 deals 20% more damage, and her skill 2 rolls a 23. Lastly, her passive allows her to gain 1 more charge on killing an enemy for a total of 3 per person she TTS. The only thing stopping her from being the most valuable Uptie is, once again, the fact that this tier list is based on the value gained, and Muller Ishmail had such a monumental jump in quality from her Uptie 3 state to what she is now. And those are all the new IDs. Hopefully that answers all the questions people have been asking me in the comments on the old video, but now let's talk about some of the tier list adjustments. I will not be talking about every single adjustment, like I said, this video would be insanely long if I did, but I will talk about the important ones and some of the funny ones. Starting from the bottom, let me talk about Blade Lineage Otis, who's fallen down significantly to the F tier due to being falsely advertised. Let me lump in Chef Gregor too, since I cover both of them in my apology video, and I basically give my reasoning there. But basically, Otis's skill description is, or was, wrong, and led me to believe her skill 1 could roll a 13, when it can only roll an 11 with enough poise. Considering she really did not get much else, this Uptie is really bad. On the contrary, Chef Gregor was undersold in his description, with his skill 3 condition proccing at 10 plus bleed potency instead of bleed count. Since this condition is actually reachable, he manages to find his way into the D tier. How horribly prestigious for him. Now, it's time for me to bare my soul and admit, Sloshmill's Uptie is a little better than what I gave her credit for. Having her in F tier was not quite fair, though I still think you probably should not Uptie this ID or really use her. She does gain double the amount of shield from her passive, making her tank better, and she is the only tank with aggro on all of her skills. She also gains Clash Lose effects, which do not matter at all, but it's more words for you to not read. The value here is just in her ability to tank hits, and do nothing else besides maybe win a clash with the skill 3. That said, this is not quite the worst value you can get. Now, one of the IDs who rose the highest in ranks, 7 Ryoshu. Honestly, I underrated this buff for sure. The extra clashing on her skill 1 and 2 does actually kind of matter, especially if you want to start off with her in Mirror Dungeon 2 hard. The buff to her counter is still an absolute meme, but it does not detract from these decent enough number increases that she did get. Like I said in that original video though, I think her numbers are pretty much solid enough without this Uptie, so it is not essential, but this certainly is better than top of D tier. Talisman Sinclair. An ID I severely underrated, and that is due to lack of experience. People claim this Uptie makes him worse, and to an extent, I agree. However, the main draw here is that now, if your opponent does not have Rupture on them to start, you can get the 5 talismans needed from one skill 2, then a skill 3 would immediately transfer them, leading to a 2-turn talisman application. The issue does come if you do not get the combo, in which case you are basically screwed, since getting exactly 5 talismans is hard without that setup. I do think he ends up right at the bottom of B tier, since the 3 Rupture count is also good on the skill 3, but only Uptie this if you are a true Rupture believer and don't mind that you are trading off consistency for power. And Corp Heathcliff's Uptie originally had a bugged description, which now makes 3 of them total, and we are only 7 IDs in. Says a lot. Originally, this Uptie was advertised as +1 final power instead of coin power. Needless to say, coin power is a lot better for this ID. I made a whole video on him once the news came out, so if you want to hear more about this ID in particular, watching this video is your best bet. Rabbid Heathcliff has fallen now right next to Suncliff, and truthfully, I do wish his Uptie was more relevant, and I bet it would be in the new railway content, and that did not turn out to be the case. I do still think the evade gaining a sin affinity is a bit more valuable than people think, but until then, 3 bullets is only really worth it if you are struggling to close out fights quickly, which, if you are probably not uptying IDs to 4. Muller Ishmail is another ID that fell down. I overrated her Uptie a little bit on release, and in my defense, she was quite new at the time. But since the majority of the buff is on the skill 3 and requires you to be at 10 plus tremor count, it is not every day that you would see active value out of this. However, with Muller Otis's passive, one could actually justify keeping Muller Ishmail in the A tier since her tremor gain is increased a ton by her. However, reliance on another ID is not very good, so B tier feels a lot more comfortable for her. Suncliff got a significant bump up. Since before I made my video on him, I was not nearly as aware of how good the extra skill power was for his skill 2, which is to say, like, really, really good. He's a solid A tier, especially now that his bugs have been all fixed up. And those are most of the significant changes. Once again, here is my tier list before, and here is my tier list after. Before I end the video, because I am Escu, I do want to talk about some things, specifically about how Uptie 4 has been treating new IDs. I've seen a lot of people talk about how Uptie 4 has been treating new IDs well, in the sense that there is a good benefit, but they don't really need it. While I agree to an extent, some choices here feel off. Specifically stuff like Suncliff's skill 2 not being a 16 without Uptie 4, when it is the standard for single coin skills at Uptie 3. I understand this may be to balance out the effects that he applies, but it still stood out to me as strange. I do think that overall, the new releases of IDs get more interesting Upties than the majority of old IDs, though interesting is an extremely subjective term. What I mean by interesting is a mix of strong and also just not boring. None of the new IDs Uptie 4s have been boring base power increases and nothing more, like how a lot of 2-star ID buffs seemed to be. If there's anything that feels weird, it is how charge IDs are consistently reliant on their Uptie 4s. With the old charge IDs, a lot of them did struggle for charge count, and Uptie 4 fixed that. Rhino Merceau, Reindeer Ishmael, W Faust, W Merceau, and even W Dawn to a lesser extent, though she's more in line with the new kind of Upties. With the newer charge IDs, the emphasis seems to be on making their rotations faster with Uptie 4, which generally leads to a lot of value, since speed is so heavily emphasized by Limbus. I don't have a particularly strong perspective on this. It is not like an issue, but it definitely feels like Project Moon knows that when they release a strong ID like W Ryoshu, and they make her nuke skill partially locked behind Uptie 4, that costs a lot of resources, which means the player potentially spends more money. You catch my drift. And it's not like I blame Project Moon for this choice. It's just simply something interesting I have observed. That's about all I have to say. I'm not too passionate about the state of Uptie 4 anymore, since I basically consider it the default for IDs, but maybe I'm privileged. But I still recognize the importance of knowing which Upties are good, and that's why I made this list, or updated it. Especially for new players who may not understand what's actually valuable for an ID to have, a good reference point is useful. Anyways, I got a bus to catch. It should be arriving in about 5 seconds, so thanks for watching. This video ends now.